The episode archive of Your Creative Push is now easier than ever to navigate. Head to yourcreativepush.com and click episodes at the top. There you'll see all the episodes listed by date and by genre. Every episode of YCP is meant to inspire you, regardless of your creative passion, but you can now easily find the ones that fit your creative medium when you need a little extra push. Your Creative Push, episode 237.
When you're excited and passionate about what you're making, that's what really makes the best work.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngmin Brown, and my guest today is Zaria Forman. Zaria is an artist who makes large-scale compositions of melting glaciers, icebergs floating in glassy water, and waves cresting with foam. And when I say large-scale, let me tell you, large-scale, you have to see these to believe them. Definitely check out her time-lapse videos. We'll have them linked up in today's show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/Zaria. But they're huge. They take her a long time to make, which we talk about in the episode. And they are really important because they stress the urgency of climate change. In this episode, we talk about some of her earliest influences, especially her mother, and some of the early traveling that she did, and also some of the later traveling that she did that really spurred her in this direction of drawing these large-scale, very large-scale drawings about climate change. We talked a lot about her methods and why she uses her hands instead of tools, and the difficulty that she sometimes experiences when she chooses a reference to go forward with, knowing how many hours she is going to have to devote to the piece and how that sometimes holds her back from starting. We talked about the importance of artists and creative people getting people to fall in love with their work, and really striving to go towards that emotional connection that you have with your particular art and your particular subject matter. And finally, we talked about some of her really amazing opportunities that she has gotten because of her art, including one of my favorites, working on NASA's Operation IceBridge, but also having her art featured in things like the Netflix show House of Cards, and also Banksy's Dismaland, which was a pretty incredible experience to hear about. So a really cool woman, a really cool artist, and I know that you're going to love this, my interview with Zaria Forman. Hi, Zaria. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. I was hoping you could maybe start out by giving us a brief look into your past and kind of what led you to the point that you're at now in your creative career.
Yeah, sure. I've always felt like an artist, I think, my whole life. Like, it was just a part of my upbringing. My mom was a landscape photographer, and so not only did we travel a lot for her work, so I was constantly inspired by very remote landscapes, which were her favorite to visit. But also, art was just fostered in the home and in the schools that I went to. And there was, we always had art supplies around, and I was always just making things, as I think most kids do. Mm-hmm. So it just felt like a very natural progression. I never really thought that I wanted to do it as a career until I was like actually doing it. And I graduated from college after majoring in it and was showing. And it was sort of this moment where I was like, oh, right, of course this makes sense. Even though it was never a conscious decision to move in that direction necessarily.
Right.
Professionally, that is. So it was always fostered as a child. And then I majored in studio art, like I said, at Skidmore College. And then I just started exhibiting right after I graduated in 2005. And I was also teaching yoga at the time and making jewelry and selling that. And the art just kept taking off more and faster than anything else. And so I just went with it. And like I said, I look back on it now and it's like, obviously, this is what I should be doing. This is my path in the world.
Right. And sometimes it takes that, dabbling in multiple things before you kind of are able to look back in hindsight and see like exactly what your path was.
Yeah. And I think for some people that path can change or shift and it might for me too. But right now it just makes absolute sense to me that this is what I'm doing and this is where I need to be.
Sure. And now, how about your actual content? The melting glaciers, these beautiful icebergs, was that always kind of what piqued your interest, or were you drawing other things as well?
Landscape in general is what has always inspired me. I think, that passion came from traveling so much throughout my childhood with my family. So when I began drawing large-scale pastel drawings, I focused on skies, sort of like hurricanes, tornadoes, the powerful forces of nature, and how that can help the viewer sort of put our everyday problems and challenges into perspective. So that was kind of my main mission when I started out right at my last year in college, and then the following few years. And then I was searching for a broader purpose for my work, something a little bit more than just, a beautiful picture for someone to put on their wall. And around that time was when I first traveled to a polar region. And so I went to Greenland in 2007 with my family. At the time, climate change was not as much of a topic of discussion in the media and everyday conversation as it is today. And so I knew of climate change as this sort of like distant concept and issue that like eventually we had to deal with, but I didn't really understand how major the crisis was until I went to Greenland and heard about all the, everyone visiting they were either scientists coming to study the ice or newscasters coming to write about it or government officials coming to learn about it, or of course the locals who are having to adapt their lifestyle to deal with it on a daily basis. So that's what really opened up my eyes to what was clearly, I think at least, the largest crisis that we face as a global community. And it became clear that that's what I needed to focus on in my work. I was planning on making drawings from the trip, inspired by the trip anyway. And to me, it seemed like I couldn't make drawings without addressing climate change, like without talking about that in my artist statements and without trying to portray it in the drawings as well. But it was also a welcomed shift for me, or a welcomed focus, I should say. So, and at the time I was actually too afraid to draw ice. I just didn't think it was possible in soft pastel because I was drawing really nebulous forms, clouds and skies and mist. And after that trip, I started moving into water a little bit and getting curious with that form of H2O, because I guess clouds are another form of it. And I started testing that out and learning more and more with each piece and pushing my limits a little bit further with each drawing and realizing like, oh, I can draw this. Oh, this looks real. Like, oh, I like the way this is turning out. And I was addressing climate change in my artist statements, but not as much in the actual work. I was making excuses and saying, well, it's the melted ice. That's why I'm drawing the water. But I knew in my heart that I needed to try to draw ice. So when I went back to Greenland for the second time in 2012, I really had this focus intention to draw ice, and I focused all my photography on the ice, and that's when I started drawing ice. But I was already talking about climate change before that.
Right. And for people that are listening that haven't checked out your work yet, which, God, you have to, but to see you working on a piece, you can really get the immensity, the large scale of your art. So why is it that you go so large? And also, why don't you use any tools?
Yeah, well, I'll answer your first question first. And you got it exactly. It's these landscapes are so epic and vast, and it's really difficult. I mean, after my first trip to Antarctica, especially, in 2015, I just got home and I was like, how the heck am I going to portray this landscape and do it any justice? And I just thought I have to go as big as I possibly can to give viewers that sense of massiveness, and that, what I'm trying to give viewers a similar experience, as close to, the same experience as what I had without actually having to travel there. So the way to do that, I think, is to draw just as large as I possibly can. And also, the bigger I can go, the closer to a 1:1 ratio to the subject matter that I'm drawing I can actually get, which allows me to draw as much detail as I possibly can. So that's another part of just trying to transport the viewer to that landscape so they can experience all the little textures and surfaces and details and light that landscape has to offer. And then to answer your second question, it's just the technique that I've developed over the years has been always, I love using my hands. It's just, there's something very immediate about touching the pigment to the paper and I don't know. I just, I use a little electric eraser sometimes to clean up an area if I want to get a nice, clean, thin white line. But other than that, I don't know. I think I just like the simplicity of it. I'm not sure why. I've tried tools in the past, but I don't know. They seem cumbersome to me.
Yeah, it seems to just being able to use your fingers, I guess, and your hands just like makes you that much closer to the message you're trying to portray.
Yeah, I think so. And
now, such large-scale pieces, they take, I believe you said 200 to 250 hours to finish?
For something around the 60 by 90-inch scale, yes. For the longer ones, the bigger ones, there were a couple I made this past year that took me 3 months each that were 7.5 feet tall by 12 feet wide. So that's the longest I've ever spent on a piece. And hour-wise, I still need to calculate that. So thank you for reminding me, because I did do a time lapse of one of them, which means I can actually calculate the exact hours. But that was more than 250 hours, probably more like 500 or more.
Oh my God. So does that ever become daunting to you? Like when you make a decision on like which photograph or which memory like you want to go forward with, knowing that time commitment and how much effort you're going to put into it, does that ever kind of stop you in your tracks from actually choosing one?
Yeah, that's probably the hardest part for me is editing my photos and choosing what to draw, because I can only make, give or take a few, 10 drawings a year, depending on, how big I go. This past year, I think I made less than 10 because I spent 6 months making these 2 enormous pieces. And so, to devote that amount of time to one piece, it has to be the best one. It has to be the right one. And that's really hard when you come back from a trip with 500 gigabytes of amazing photos.
Right.
So, it's tough. And I probably have enough material to last me several lifetimes. I still selfishly want to travel back to these places.
Of course.
But, and also, what inspires me tends to shift over the months and years. And as I learn more about drawing ice, I find new kind of textures and surfaces that I want to attempt, and different kinds of compositions that I might be interested in now that I wasn't when I took my first, look over the photos from a trip. So yeah, that's definitely the hardest part for me, is editing and deciding what I'm actually going to draw.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And in watching some of your time lapses, it seems like you always have a reference in your hand, like you're always holding a photo. And I think the tendency when you're drawing a glacier or melting ice is to improvise a bit. Like, who's going to know if it's not completely accurate to the photo? So how important is accuracy to you?
It's pretty important, I would say. The thing is, I'm not trying to make the drawing look like a photo. I'm trying to make the drawing look like the real landscape that I saw. So experiencing it myself that's why that's important. Like, that's why I need to go to these places at the forefront of climate change and see the light shift over them and see, the water move in the wind. And I use my memory of those experiences as well as the photos to reference when I'm making the work. But yeah, I am following the photos pretty closely because I want to be as true to the landscape that existed at that point in time as I can, to recreate this thing that actually existed at that point in time, which, just side note, is quite often completely different, probably looks completely different by the time I finish the drawing because these things are so ephemeral. But sometimes I will make a reflection in water that was dark and choppy, or sometimes I'll make the sky gray and put some clouds in there if it was a bright blue day, or change the shape of the ice just a tiny bit to create a balanced composition. But yeah, 90% of the time I'd say I work straight from the photos because I really want to recreate what actually existed at that point in time when I saw it.
Do you ever struggle with the fact that your art is absolutely gorgeous, breathtaking, beautiful, but the message that you're really trying to convey is kind of really an ugly one?
Yeah, it's not a struggle. It's on purpose. I think it is. Climate change is such a daunting and often depressing topic, and it can be I think paralyzing when you learn about all the horrible and destructive things that are happening and what, horrible and destructive things could potentially happen in the very near future. And I think I just find it more helpful to look on the bright side of things and think positively and recognize the beauty in these landscapes, because not only is seeing something beautiful and thinking of it in a positive light inspiring, and I think helps us move forward in a positive direction, and it helps us, what's the word? It's more empowering as opposed to paralyzing, I think. And so I'm trying to show the beauty of these places to inspire people, but also to fall in love with them, because I think, when you love something, you want to protect it. And I've fallen in love with these places by traveling to them. And so that's why I want to create this moment in time when people can feel like they've been transported there. They will fall in love with it as I have, because how can you not? It's so stunningly beautiful. Yeah. And so I hope to inspire people to make some shift in their lives, however small that might be.
Absolutely. And if people want, they can go to your website, zariaforman.com. You have some tips there for reducing your carbon footprint and a lot of resources that are great for people as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's a terrible problem that we're facing, and I liken it to like being on being tricked on one of those like reality TV shows, like those prank TV shows, like that Carbonaro effect, where he like does magic tricks and like changes your reality. And there's like this moment where you see where he tells the people that they were just, being pranked or whatever. And It's like this shift that happens where like you go from living one existence to living another, and suddenly you're in the other side of it where you realize you were just being pranked or whatever. And I feel like we are in that shift right now, and being on the other side of it and looking back to a place that we can't get to is like the scariest thought. So I really appreciate what you're doing. You say all the time statistics are one thing, but you're trying to portray it in a way that connects with people in a different way, and I just think you're doing such a fabulous job, and it's a wonderful thing that you're doing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And yeah, I think it's really important to connect with these places, but also the crisis as a whole on an emotional level, because that's what creates change. That's what makes us act and do something. That's like what behavioral psychology has proven, that when you have this like emotional connection with something, that's what spurs action. So I'm just trying to play my part in the best way that I think I can.
Oh, you definitely are. You've had some pretty amazing opportunities as well, and I'm a huge fan of NASA, so I was wondering if you could talk about their Operation IceBridge.
Yeah, so Operation IceBridge is the largest airborne survey of Earth's polar ice. They have been surveying the ice at both poles, so Antarctica and several places in the Arctic, for the past 8 years, and they take a suite of instruments onto an airplane. There's a couple different aircrafts that they use, both in the North and South Poles. And they have like lasers, radar, an infrared sensor, digital photography, and something called a gravimeter, which measures gravity. So basically they're mapping the geography of the ice and measuring how it's shifting and changing to try and help us prepare for the future, essentially. And it's called IceBridge because it's basically bridging these two satellites that are operating similarly, that are collecting similar measurements. But there was one that finished 8 years ago and a new one that's going to take over in about a year or two. So yeah, I was fortunate enough to be invited by one of the navigators to come down to Antarctica with them this past fall. It was just a mind-blowing experience. I mean, first of all, I was like really intimidated to go flying with a group of NASA scientists.
Yeah, of course.
and I also just kept thinking it wasn't real. Like I kept thinking I'm going to show up in Chile and like it's going to be some like kidnapping scenario. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but thankfully that's not what happened. I was just really surprised in a wonderful way to see how like warm and welcoming the entire team was to me. They were all really grateful that I was there. Some of them had known about my work previously. And, these scientists are just like, I think they really understand how important art is in communicating the importance of what they're doing and the importance of the crisis in general and getting people to connect with it. the work that they're doing is really like hard and grueling. I mean, we flew for 12 hours every single day that the weather allowed. I was there for 3 weeks, but the campaign ran for about 6 to 10. And the crew is not allowed to fly every day in a row because it's just way too tolling on, your body and your mind. And you have to be in top shape if you're going to be flying these planes over such insanely remote and dangerous places. But the scientists are the top of their field. They're the only ones that can really do what they're doing. And many of them have actually made the instruments that are on the airplane and are the only ones who know how to operate or fix them if something goes wrong. And so they have to fly every single day. And I mean, I have so much respect for them because I flew 3 flights in a row at one point and had the worst migraine of my life on the third day. And I was being very aware of how much water I was drinking and getting enough sleep as much as you can with 12-hour flights every day. So it's so important what they're doing, and they are working so hard to collect this information that is really, really valuable for the entire world.
And then what did that do for you as an artist to be able to see it from a completely different perspective?
Yeah, I mean, that was so fascinating for me. I had been to Antarctica the previous winter. That was my first and only time there, on the ground and on a ship for a month. And that was just like otherworldly and spectacular in its own right. And this was just a very different experience to see the ice from above. We flew pretty low. The instruments measure at 1,500 feet. And so we would fly from Chile every day over to Antarctica and lower down to 1,500 feet above the ice. And so you get quite a bit of detail of the glaciers from above. And just to see the massive amount of ice that's there, I mean, yeah, it's melting and it's collapsing, unfortunately. But it was just, I mean, the shapes and the textures and the compositions that from the photos that I took are just completely different from anything else I'd ever seen before. So I'm really excited for this new body of work that I haven't begun yet. I'm going to start it as soon as I'm finished with the first trip to Antarctica is what I'm working on now, and what my upcoming solo show will be about. And then the show after that will be these NASA images that I got from both poles. So I was able to go meet up with them in Greenland as well just a few weeks ago. And yeah, it almost looks abstract from that perspective. I mean, they're really beautiful and subtle and not so subtle patterns that you see in the ice. And I don't know, it's going to be really different. And it's like, that's a scary step for me for my work. But things that scare me are usually that's usually a good thing. It means I'm going to learn something, and we'll see. Hopefully people will like it.
Absolutely. Well, and yeah, things that scare you are definitely good for you. Are there any other things that scare you, or any other kind of resistances that you deal with or battle with or have battled with in the past and maybe gotten over a bit? The scale of my work going as big as I possibly can is it's always a scary thing to start a piece that's like the biggest I've ever made. And, part of the reason is what we talked about before, just like, did I choose the right image? Is this going to look big? I'm going to waste 3 months of my life and time on this. Is it not going to turn out well? And also, like, the material that I work with is really vulnerable, and that's why no other artist, except for the one that I know of, Robert Longo, nobody else works on that kind of scale with soft pastels or charcoals, because it's just so vulnerable and expensive to frame with a giant piece of glass, and then to transport it is really dangerous. And so it's tough. That's probably the biggest challenge I face with my work. But yeah, I don't know. The scariest thing coming up, I think, is this next body of work. I think I'll be moving in a much more abstract direction. It won't actually be abstract. I will be drawing the views that I saw, but they're going to look abstract. Like some of the images I captured out of context, you have no idea what you're looking at. And that really excites me, but I don't know if, my fans or, people who buy my work if it's going to speak to them as much as a beautiful iceberg with its reflection in the water and the sun shining on it, if they're going to like it as much as that. But we'll see. It's just, I really feel like it's the direction I need to go in, and I try not to worry too much about it, if things will sell. That's never driven my inspiration. So, and so far so good. So hopefully this will be okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, was the fact that do you worry about your audience, or do you just kind of go from your heart? And if it does seem something different, I think a lot of times people are afraid to venture off into a new direction, even if it's not that far from what you're doing before, but it's something completely different, so how do you kind of push through that?
Yeah, I really try hard not to think about, is this going to sell? Or, are people going to like it? I mean, of course, I want the drawings to be beautiful. That's definitely important to me. But I try to learn something new with every drawing. So I try to look for new textures and surfaces to attempt with soft pastel. And then compositionally, my taste has, changes over the years. And I find myself moving in a direction that I think might be less popular. So that's, like I said, that's scary. But yeah, I try to squash that voice in the back of my head, because I think ultimately if I'm drawing what inspires me most and what I feel most excited to make, that excitement is going to translate into the finished product and make it the best that it can be. And I think that is ultimately what viewers respond to. So that's always been my motto, ever since I've been making art professionally, and so far so good. So I'm sticking to it.
Very good. And you've had some pretty amazing opportunities as well. Your work has been featured in House of Cards, and another thing which I don't know if you're even able to talk about was Banksy's Dismaland.
Oh yeah.
Can you tell me anything about that?
I just got a t-shirt from him in the mail, which I'm really excited
cool.
about. But yeah, I mean, I'm not really supposed to talk about how that came about, but it was an incredibly exciting thing for me. Definitely one of the things I'm most proud of, I think, in my career life. And just such a wonderful experience to be a part of that. Meeting the other artists that were in the show, it was so wonderful to see how excited everyone was to be a part of it, no matter how well known of an artist they were. Everyone was just like, this is so cool, we're in a Banksy show.
It was actually like Disneyland instead of Dismaland.
No, it was definitely dismal.
It's the greatest place on earth.
Yeah.
Cool.
That was just really a great experience overall, and I think the exhibit was really well curated, really well done, and yeah, I hope I get to be a part of something else in the future that he does, but I'm really grateful for that. It was really fun. That was another thing where I was just like, this can't be real. Banksy
I'm getting
just
kidnapped.
Send me a message. and I really questioned it up until the day I landed in Weston-super-Mare in England. And they showed me and someone gave me a little tour of like the installation a few nights before the opening. But really up until that moment, I was like, this could be a massive art hoax. I mean, even buying, spending all the money for the shipping and insurance and plane tickets for all the artists and all their work is still a fraction of what all of this artwork costs, cumulatively. Right. So I thought it could be a hoax, but thankfully it wasn't.
So the advice that I'm taking from this episode is, if you think you're going to get kidnapped or you think that you're getting hoaxed, to just go anyway.
Go with it.
That's awesome.
Face
I love
the
it.
fears.
Well, something that's not a hoax is your new solo show coming up. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, thank you. It is opening September 7th in Seattle at Winston Wächter Fine Art. They are the gallery that represents me. They have a space in New York and a space in Seattle. So yeah, it opens September 7th. I will be there, and I'll have a video piece, a sound piece, which are both new for me.
Cool.
And drawings, all from my first trip to Antarctica, which was traveling for a month as the artist in residence aboard the National Geographic Explorer in Antarctica. And yeah, I'm really excited for it. And then the solo show after that, which will probably be about a year from September, so a ways away, is going to be in New York, and that's going to be the NASA drawings from aerial drawings from both poles.
Super cool. We'll have all of that information linked up at the show notes page today at yourcreativepush.com/Zaria. Zaria, this has been amazing, but it's time for the final push. And this is where I ask you to reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today, and just give them your best final words of advice and really push them to pursue their own creative passions.
Okay. I think as an artist doing something creative, I think the most important thing is to find what you feel most passionate about and what excites you most to address in your work. Because when you are working from the heart, creating from the heart, and when you're excited and passionate about what you're making, like I said before, that's what really makes the best work. And then that's what viewers respond to. So yeah, I think it's just important to do that work, which can sometimes that's really easy for people. Sometimes they know right away. Sometimes it takes years of digging deep. Sometimes it's something really personal. And then sometimes it's really global. I mean, I think it is important to have a personal connection with your work, because I think that's what speaks to audiences really well. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, I'm getting a little rambly, but I think that's my best advice.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you, like I said, you do that very effectively. And I just love the message that you're trying to convey and successfully conveying. And I think you are doing really important work. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Of course. You can find Zaria on her website, which is zariaforman.com. On Instagram, she is Zaria Lynn. And on Facebook and Twitter, she is Zaria Forman. And again, we'll have that all linked up at today's show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/Zaria. Zaria, thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Huge thanks once again to Zaria for coming on the show. Guys, remember what Zaria was saying about how to connect the most with your audience. It's by getting them to be emotionally invested in your work. The way to get them emotionally invested in your work is to be emotionally invested in your work yourself. To choose subject matter that you actually care about, no matter what other people think. There could be no good reason why you like the things that you like, except for the fact that they pique your interest. And once you start exploring those things that pique your interest, by not judging them, by going towards them, you can go deeper and deeper into that to create that emotional investment yourself with those things that you care about. And oftentimes, like Zaria was saying, you'll look back and realize the signs were there all along, that this thing was calling to you all your life. And it's just a matter of you really pursuing it, and pursuing it as passionately as you can, with as much love as you can. And you might realize how much you desperately care about this subject matter. And the deeper you can build that relationship, the stronger your work will be. Don't be afraid to pursue those things, and don't be afraid to say something with your work, because that is when people connect with you the most, and that is when your work is the most powerful. And just to note that Zaria said her show opens on the 7th, but it's actually the 9th of September. Again, that will be linked up in the show notes page today at yourcreativepush.com/Zaria, Zaria, if you want to find out more details about that, if you're going to be in Seattle, or if you just want to keep up with Zaria and all of the amazing things that she is doing with her art. As we mentioned, Operation IceBridge, Dismaland, House of Cards, and also she has a really great TED Talk. We'll link all of that up at the show notes page. And on Monday's show, we have Matthew Miller. Matthew is an active lifestyle artist, and his artwork celebrates the human body in action and the mental states that go along with it. I really enjoyed my conversation with him. He really thinks differently about his art, and he is really in the trenches at the moment, so it was really cool to get him on the show at this point in his career to talk about the way he thinks about his creative journey. Definitely an episode you don't want to miss, especially if you're starting out your art career and trying to think of unique and different ways to both do your art and market your art. You can find him on his website, which is MatthewMillerArt.com, or on Instagram, he is matt.moves. And I also just want to say thank you all. We just hit 500,000 lifetime downloads for the podcast. A really cool milestone. I can't quite believe it or comprehend it or understand it, but it's a really cool number to hit. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for listening to not just one episode, but listening to all of them when you need that creative inspiration. And thank you for sharing it out to other people who you think might need that inspiration. And thank you for reaching out to me personally to tell me what the show has done for you. That is what keeps me motivated. Some really cool emails have been coming in recently with some really cool opportunities that you're all getting for yourselves, I might add. But it's really inspiring and humbling to me to see that the show is actually working. It's doing its job, and it is pushing you to not only get to your creative art, but being proud of it and putting it out there and creating new opportunities for yourself so that you can really make it a part of your life. So cool, and I'm so fired up by it. So thanks again for 500,000 downloads, 500,000 listens, 500,000 inspirations, and here we go to 1 million. But that is all I've got for you today. So hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done. So go and get it done, and we will be here for you on Monday if you need the push again. Have a wonderful, productive, creative weekend. I love you all so much, and we will see you next time. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.